Action.
Yes, may the Lord open. Yes. Praise be. May under his eye. Joseph! Give me children or else I die! We've been sent good weather. Hello everyone and welcome back to the Neverland Book Club. Although I like to keep an air of lightheartedness with jovial delights here on this channel, today's topic of discussion revolves around perhaps one of the more serious sets of books I have ever read. After binge watching the entire series in anticipation of the new season coming next week, I decided to read both The Handmaid's Tale, as well as its after accounts published 35 years later, The Testaments, in succession, and well, frankly, I am not well. As always, I have the utmost intention to be honest with you, dear viewer, and I must say, these books were incredibly difficult for me to read. I actually had to supplement my readings with other books, so to give my mind a break from the situational horrors that lie between these pages. I may or may not have used a small envelope filled with Xanax as a bookmark, but nevertheless, I was able to finish in time and with much to say. Before we begin, I'd like to remind you to please subscribe if you're not already. I have many videos planned and in the works for the coming weeks and wouldn't want you to miss it, so also be sure to click that little bell to be notified when I've just recovered from yet another all-nighter. Alright, let's start, shall we? Ladies, wings off, have a seat, and let us begin this ceremony. I mean video. Oh god. Okay. That is better. Now I just look like Little Red Riding Hood. That's fine. Now, strap in because this is going to be a long one. We've been sent good weather. The Handmaid's Tale, an epistolary novel written by Margaret Atwood in 1984 from the secretive perspective of an unnamed handmaid trapped in the depths of Gilead, formerly the United States. After the US has been overthrown with the intentions of reversing the law of the land into a utopian theocratic dictatorship, the expectations of men and women in society retreat back to biblical roles with literal implications and even more literal and severe punishments when protested. Despite where you may find this book on the shelves of a bookshop or library, I must tell you, this is not fiction. Well, not entirely at least. The accounts recorded in both novels are that of regretful historical accuracy. Atwood forwards the book by stating, "One of my rules was that I would not put any events into the book that had not already happened in what James Joyce calls the nightmare of history. God is in the details, and so is the devil," paraphrased. This is perhaps why I needed to take these two stories bit by bit. Even while watching the show, I couldn't handle more than a few episodes at a time because I could feel myself just festering with anger and sadness. The empath in me was being beaten with a misogynistic bludgeon, bleeding for the women in history that I would never have the chance to look into their eyes and thank them for their sacrifice, for their unyielding strength. Being a woman was never easy, but I must admit it's never been better than it is now. And the horror that this story presents is the notion that such oversights could be taken away without cause or warning. When watching, Pablo didn't feel the same things I was feeling, and I didn't expect him to. In this world, he would be all right. Most men would. Most men have been all right throughout history, and no, I don't want this video to be a man versus woman thing. That's not at all what I'm going for here, but it cannot be denied that a book like this, it is not only a look into history, but a foreshadowing of a possible future if vigilance dwindles while ignorance prevails. The show also does well to add more dynamic to the question of good and evil while introducing topics of gender and power. Everything is gray. It's not a man evil, women good. Quite interestingly, it is the women who are more oppressive over the other women in society so as to keep what little power they do have. But make no mistake, even the highest woman in power answers to a man in Gilead. Well, heavy stuff indeed. Nevertheless, I believe I was explaining the story itself. Ah, yes. The main focus of the regressing back into Gilead was not only to control the population, but to multiply it. With a birthing crisis on their hands, the men in power decided to supplement a biblical practice from the accounts of Genesis 30:1-3, which described the relationship between Rachel and her handmaid Bilhah. think I'm pronouncing that correctly. As the story goes, Rachel and her husband Jacob have been unsuccessful in their efforts to conceive a child. And so, in desperation, Rachel says to Jacob, "Here, husband, go in unto my handmaid Bila. She will be my vessel. She has no say in this, she has no voice, but I am willing to overlook that for the chance of motherhood." Paraphrased. In the real world, as well as in the story, people have been treated as actual livestock. A commodity, a means of labor, be it manual or motherly. Women, specifically women with the ability to bear children in this world, are treated as a limited resource and are thereby dehumanized to a point where they themselves can be lost within the true nature of their circumstances. The breaking of the human spirit on such a national level it's aggravating. To further dehumanize the handmaids, they are stripped of their lives, their children, and even their names. Their new names are subject to the men that own them, mostly commanders, men in high government standing who have been issued a handmaid. Our writer is called Offred, since her commander's name is Fred. She is of Fred. Atwood also adds that the name came from the word offered, so multiple meanings. There are other handmaids who all follow the same pattern. Commander Warren's handmaid is called of Warren, Commander Joseph's is of Joseph, and so on. See, it's aggravating. These commanders attempt to have children by their handmaids with their wives involved. It's all very, very biblical. Becoming a handmaid is not innately based on the ability to bear children. These women are given a choice, if you could call it that. Either repent for their wickedness during their lives before Gilead, be it from adultery, divorce, homosexuality, you name it, or go to the colonies, a radioactive cleanup program meant to kill you within a few years, if you're lucky. There's also the option of Jezebels, which is basically an underground sex club, but they don't advertise that on the pamphlets. We find out at the end of the first novel that what we have just read is actually a collection of transcripts from tapes left behind by Offred. Cassette tapes, for those of you who are younger. Actually, if you're young, don't. Later. Don't read this if you're young, oh my god. If you're under 18, please don't. Please don't. You'll ruin your psyche. Her demise remains unknown since the book ends basically where the first season ends, Offred being taken by the Guardians in a black van to who knows where. From 1984 until 2019, that's all she wrote. Literally. But when the second season came out in 2018, we got to see where she was taken, and I am curious to know how far a human spirit will go before it is completely broken. Elizabeth Moss in the show is beyond excellence. I don't think there is another actor, alive or dead, who could have played Offred, or June as her real name in the show, quite like she has brought her to life. Where Offred in the novel is quietly strong, June is a storm, both quiet and raging, devastating yet soft. Simply put, she's a mother. But back to the books. The stark differences between the internal monologue spelled out in these transcripts of Offred and the characters she is accounting gives a pretty well-rounded description of the different mindsets one may find in Gilead. The line between dystopia and utopia, depending on who is telling the story. Reading Atwood feels like you're being spoken to by a wise and ancient all-knowing tree. A force unknown to me, yet I know it knows me perhaps better than I do. Reading doesn't feel like reading, it feels like thinking. Her ability to speak not only directly to you, but as you, yourself, is eerie. As if my own thoughts have been printed before me and I am thinking them in real time as I read. Atwood has also mastered the passive voice, a concept most writers shy away from, but here it is gravitated towards. Being passive is the only way our protagonist has a chance of surviving in this world of the rulers and the ruled. But don't mistake this passive voice for weakness, but meekness, for only they shall inherit the earth. Her writing style and metaphors are no-nonsense, direct, to the point, with hints of fragrance that linger longer than the heavy-handed perfumes of other writers. They're practical. She wastes no time with the aesthetics or cosmetics of writing. Nothing is meant to feel pretty or sweet. It's meant to feel real, which adds to the horror. This horror is a situational horror. A horror based on more than just a monster or bad people. but the horror of the past and what humans are capable of when forced to forget their own names. Take of Howard, for example. Spoilers. Of Howard's story isn't mentioned in the book, but we become familiar with the names of the commanders and their handmaids. In the 3rd season, we are introduced to of Howard, a pious and well-groomed handmaid who is paired with June. We learn of Howard has had many children by her commanders and is pregnant with another. But when she betrays June, she is shunned by the other handmaids and snaps. My question, was she strong? Or was she weak? Strong of heart? Weak of mind? Or the opposite? She was strong enough to endure the change in society, to be used essentially, to give up 3 babies. But when her peers start to outcast her for subscribing to the belief system that has been forced upon them, she snaps completely, resorting to murder and essentially suicide, willing to kill her unborn and unwanted child. So, how much could a person take? Even June, I found myself asking countless times, how could a person take this? I wouldn't be able to take this. Or could I? Given the circumstances and thinking big picture here, could I? I don't know. I don't want to know. I hope I never have to know. I hope no one ever has to know. But the truth is, so many do. June's quest for her daughter and her reason for not leaving Gilead at every and surprisingly occasional chance she was presented with was what gave the show its purpose. It's why we have yet to see June run. She chooses to stay, to find her daughter. This was absent in the novel. Her daughter is mentioned, but not to the extent of her importance in the show. That is, until we get to the 2nd book. Lighting change, please. This one. The Testaments, as mentioned, was a long-awaited continuation of the previous book. 35 years after the release of the original Handmaid's Tale novel, and just a few months after the 3rd season aired, we are introduced to several accounts of Gilead from different perspectives. Still written in epistolary format, we see the world of Gilead through the eyes of 3 distinct and important characters. Agnes, baby Nicole, age 16, and of course, Aunt Lydia. If you haven't seen the show or read the book, again, spoilers. Agnes is the name given to Hanna after she is taken from June and her husband as they were trying to escape to Canada. Baby Nicole, as the book calls her, is the half-sister of Agnes and a product of June's successful handmaid duties, though her father is not who the nation thinks he is. We are not deliberately told that their mother is the June we picture as Elizabeth Moss, as the original handmaid from the previous book, but it is speculated within the lore of the book as well as the show's writers. I enjoyed The Testaments immensely more than The Handmaid's Tale, as you can tell. I even ran out of space and started tapping the top. It was still difficult to read for the same reasons, but it felt more like a story than the accounts of just one person. The 3 are telling their stories as if writing from a future space, in hindsight, but all 3 stories end up lining up towards the middle/end of the book, which gave me a sense of urgency while reading, like if I stopped, the characters would cease to exist and I was responsible for their safety. Aunt Lydia is absolutely nothing like she is in the show. She was a judge of high standing in the time before, had been married twice and divorced, and had an abortion in her younger years. All reasons to be deemed an unwoman in the eyes of Gilead. However, her stern demeanor, her intense willpower, and her overall ability to steer people in her own direction gives her the advantage of being an aunt. A woman of higher standing in Gilead. One who is of authority over the other ladies and can even read and write. Which is a crime for everyone else. You will lose your fingers and even your hand. First offense is a pinky. I wouldn't even have arms. Aunt Lydia's perspective is how we get to see the United States turn into Gilead almost overnight. The lengths men and officials had gone through to subdue women into turning against each other until there was nothing left but the meek, as intended. Aunt Lydia's disguise of her own character in plain sight is not fully realized at first. A treat, honestly, since we are perhaps so used to seeing the dynamic and complicated characteristics of the Aunt Lydia we know in the show. She becomes so powerful in the books, some girls even pray to her, since her portrait is hanging in almost every classroom. A statue is erected in her honor for all the good she has brought to Gilead, but there are secrets hiding behind those brown fabrics. Fabriques. In the show, Agnes/Hanna is only about 8 to 10 years old. In the novel, we see her grow up into a young woman and face the prospect of marriage. To avoid such a fate, she decides to become an aunt. This calling, as real or fake as it may have been, was of course no accident. As we learn, nothing truly is. Years pass and we see how she views Gilead, how her friends perceive their faith. This I found so interesting since it shows what can transpire when such a mass of young people are deprived of knowledge. Basic knowledge. About the world, about themselves, about their own capabilities. The young girls of Gilead truly believe in what the aunts and men are telling them, that they simply don't have the mind for reading, that their number one goal in life should be to have a child by a man that is perhaps 3 times their age in some cases. Everything is just so upsetting. And then we are introduced to Daisy, baby Nicole, a 16-year-old rebel living in Canada. As we know from the show, Nicole was smuggled out of Gilead as a baby and has therefore become the poster child of Gilead. She is untouchable within their borders and is therefore the perfect subordinate for Mayday, an organized group of rebels hell-bent on destroying Gilead. She's able to smuggle herself back into Gilead by way of the Pearl Girls, basically missionary girls meant to recruit women into Gilead since women are their main commodity of trade, basically. We have yet to see the Pearl Girls in the show, but they do play such a detrimental role in the novel, I expect a cameo in the coming season, perhaps. She is successful and is brought to Aunt Lydia and Agnes. Here, they learn of their true mission, to bring down Gilead for good. Their journey out of Gilead is suspenseful, captivating, and so relatable for so many real refugees trying to escape their own Gileads. They succeed, bringing viable information about the commanders through Aunt Lydia's collection of secrets that was powerful enough to topple the entire state. We don't know what becomes of Aunt Lydia in the end. Perhaps she is killed for her treason. Her entries end with hearing footsteps approaching her office after the news of the girls' escape breaks. She's content with her long and meaningful life and is proud of the girls for finishing what she intended years before, when she was still being tortured, before she put on the brown dress and became Aunt Lydia. The girls are reunited with their mother, whether that be June or not. Though there is a bit of an Easter egg since one of the passwords used by the girls as they are escaping Gilead is June Moon, so I took this as more of a nod to Elizabeth Moss's character. At the end of both books, we are reading the transcript of a lecture given on Gilead Studies in the year 2197, way after the fall of Gilead. In the first book, this is where we learn of Offred's possible escape, since what we just read were transcribed tapes, as I said. In the second book, we learn how the 2 books could be linked by Offred's true identity as both the Handmaid and Agnes and Nicole's mother. This is all, of course, open to interpretation, and as I assume, some may be fan service. But nonetheless, as an academic, I did extensively appreciate the presentation Atwood chose to adopt in these 2 accounts. Knowing that Gilead does fall is a sense of hope at the end of an otherwise hopeless story. It gives the reader a sense of closure at the end of the book I didn't know I needed, and calmed me into dreaming of the future as a more peaceful place than today. If you are like me and love to dissect works that go from word to screen and back again, you'll be delighted to learn that while the first few episodes of The Handmaid's Tale and its corresponding novel were sometimes word for word in description and voiceover, The Testaments is more of a fan service work that tries to tie up loose ends and give the reader a different experience of Gilead than what we see in the show. Seeing Gilead through the eyes of Aunt Lydia pretending to be a believer while in the show she is the voice of everything Gilead stands for. Agnes is but a child in the show, and in the novel she is her own cunning and brave young woman, yet still clearly groomed by her upbringing. Nicole is an outsider looking in. She is perhaps the most relatable to those reading or watching, since she speaks and acts like anyone raised in the modern world. Her true identity is kept from her until she is 16 and joins Mayday, but her view of Gilead never really changes. Atwood's writing style also evolved over the years, clearly. Where Offred's passive voice gave way for her ability to account her experiences in the first place, the 3 narrators of the Testaments are anything but passive. 3 completely different women, all with the same goal before them. Even though these stories did bring me some psychological and emotional despair, I would still recommend them to anyone willing to put themselves through the coming anxieties. Though the show and books differ in tone and presentation, they still portray the same message in their own excellent ways. They complement one another in accounting for a more rounded view of this presented world. I don't know what made Atwood write the Testaments after the show had already been 2 seasons deep, but I can say I am very glad she did. And I applaud her for being brave enough to write these stories, even if it meant sacrificing her own mental well-being at times. So, who should read The Handmaid's Tale and the Testaments? Everyone. Everyone should read these books. They should be taught in the college curriculum. There should be classes given on just these 2 books alone, because nothing is more important than learning from the mistakes of the past and educating young and old people alike of the tragedies within our history, of the atrocities man has inflicted on fellow man, but mostly woman. Because no one should go their whole lives without at least knowing the truth about the struggle women face day to day simply because they were born without a Y chromosome. Because, as Atwood puts it, history does not repeat itself, but it rhymes. This is a much more tense episode of the Neverland Book Club, but I truly felt it needed to be made. I, as you've probably learned by now, have a lot to say on the matter. Please, tell me what you think of Atwood's foreboding allegory on Gilead as a future possibility of this country. I would very much like to talk to someone about all of this, instead of just shouting in my own head. To lighten the mood, if you're unfamiliar with Atwood, here are a few of her other many titles that you may have heard of, not knowing it was her works. And links in the description, if you want to browse. Well, that's all I have for you guys today. Thank you so much for watching. Make sure to like this video if you liked it, and subscribe for more book-related videos every week. I look forward to the new season of The Handmaid's Tale coming out next week, and I will keep you posted on my opinions as the story transpires. Be sure to follow me on Instagram if you'd like some daily bookish content and just to see what I'm up to. Today's shout out goes to Stesia McLean. I hope I'm saying your name right. What an honor it is truly to be compared to the great Effie Trinket. Thank you for your kind words and your support. There's a little less than a week left in the Shadow Bone Trilogy Giveaway, and although the drawing will be at random, I do hope the odds are ever in your favor. Also, if you're interested in reading both books, either the physical copy or on Audible, it is narrated by Claire Danes. She has a lovely voice. Links are in the description. Or you can go to audible.com/ what is it?
Audibletrial.com.
Audibletrial.com/
Neverland.
For
a free trial.
For a free trial. Alright, stay lost, keep reading, and remember, nolite de bastardas carborandorum. Goodbye. We've been sent good weather.
You have destroyed my life, my family, my friends, my country, and my child. I ask for justice.